So in this video, I'm going to give you a full breakdown of my Ecuador portraits. Everything from the initial idea, all the gear I brought with me, how I shot and lit the photos, how I backed them up while traveling, and then all the post-processing at the end of the project.
So me and Amanda had talked about going to Ecuador for years. We had a trip planned in 2020 that got canceled, and then it kind of just fell to the back burner for a while until the end of 2022 when we got a flight alert for round-trip tickets from Salt Lake City to Ecuador for $350. And that was an opportunity we just couldn't pass up. We bought the flights without a plan, and in April of 2023, we were going to Ecuador.
Our budget tickets left us with a rough flight plan to get to Ecuador. When we finally did arrive, we had to hop straight on a bus and take a 4-hour trip to Mindo, a town in the cloud forests of Ecuador, a high-altitude, mountainous rainforest. This was the first stop on our 2.5-week trip. We spent a couple days in a hostel here, and this is where I started my portrait project. On our first hike of this trip, we went to see a few waterfalls, and we got caught out in a pretty heavy storm. We took cover under a little picnic awning. A couple minutes later, a trail worker, Nive, showed up drenched with his chainsaw, and I asked if I could take his photo. Okay, one down. That wasn't so bad. On this whole trip, only one person was too camera shy to let me take their photo. And the more people I asked, the easier it got. The rest of our stay in Mindo, I photographed 6 more people. Here are 2 construction workers outside of a little butterfly habitat that we went to visit one day. And then this woman owned a little pizza shop with a brick oven not far from our hostel, and her friend and her friend's granddaughter were hanging out outside. So why shoot portrait work on an international trip like this? For me, when I think of travel, the people and the culture are what really get me excited. I've been shooting photos for years, and portraits are really the only thing that I never ever get tired of shooting. And I think portraits just have a certain power to them, something about that human connection that comes across even in a photo. So Amanda runs her own YouTube channel, and this whole Ecuador trip was really to film videos for her channel. But I knew I wanted to do this portrait project, so in addition to the video rig that we normally carry for YouTube, we had a bunch of photo stuff that I had to figure out how to pack. Let's head back to the truck and I'll show you everything I brought to shoot these portraits. After a couple days in Mindo, we were off to a small town nestled in the shadow of a volcano, Baños, named after their volcanic hot springs. We were only here for 2 days and it was pretty busy, but I did fit in a couple of portraits. One of the days in Baños, we took this crazy hike up to a little park. It was only a couple miles long, but we gained a few thousand feet of elevation. About halfway up this hike, I saw a couple guys collecting grass for cattle, and they were happy to let me take their photo. So on the trip, we had an A7 IV all rigged out for video, and then for photos, I had this in my bag. It's the Sony A7 III with the battery grip on bottom. And then I shot all of the portraits with this Sony 50mm f1.2 lens. A beast of a lens. I love the images that come out of it, but this thing is super heavy. On that lens, we had a variable ND filter. This filter on the lens lets you shoot at wider apertures, but still keep your shutter speed below your camera's flash sync speed, which for this one is 1/250th of a second. On top of the camera, we had a little Profoto trigger to set off the flash. And for this trip specifically, I actually bought the Profoto A2. I planned on bringing one of my bigger flashes, and I'm really glad I got this tiny little one. It has enough power, and I didn't have to haul my flash all over Ecuador. So this little thing was awesome. On top of the flash, I had a quarter CTO gel that just kind of warmed up the light a little bit, and that pretty much stayed on my light the entire trip. This is the Profoto Click softbox, which I also got for the trip to go with the small flash. And all the portraits were lit with this. The flash just magnets right here on the back. And you're good to go. So this is the whole camera, rigged out, ready to go. Pretty big and clunky. I've actually this year downsized a lot of my gear, and you can check that out in this video. But for Ecuador, this did great. Love the images that I got from this, the 51.2, and this is a great photo camera. I just prefer the A7 IV now because I shoot a lot of video. So yeah, that's about it. So in addition to the photo kit, we traveled around with a 14-inch MacBook Pro. Me and Amanda shared the load on that, and we use that every night to dump all our footage and all our photos onto a hard drive like this. These are durable, so little SanDisk SSD hard drive. We carried 3 of these. So we had our main one that we would dump all the footage onto, and then we would duplicate that one to 2 other drives. And I would carry one of those on my person at all times. Amanda had one at all times, and then the main one would stay typically in our room. But then if one got lost or our room got broken into or anything like that, we always had a copy of everything from the trip. And then once we got home, we could pull from those drives and just organize everything nice and neat and then run it through my whole home backup system. We're losing the light here, but it's starting to look really good on those mountains behind me. When I'm shooting portraits, I generally don't want anything to take away from the subject. The composition and the lighting are really just to complement the subject of the photo. So my lighting style is pretty simple, typically 45 to the side and 45 degrees up, classic Rembrandt lighting. I don't want the average viewer to even notice that the photo is lit with artificial light. I want it to just be kind of natural, blend well with the ambient light, and just really accentuate the subject and not take away from it by using some fancy flashy lighting or something weird in the composition. So very classic, simple style.
So we were most excited about this next stop on our trip. We were starting a 3-day trek through the Andes to a crater lake at 13,000 feet. I took these 2 photos at the hostel we stayed at before beginning the hike. These people were so welcoming, and they treated us like we were part of the family. We didn't see many people along this route, the occasional farmer and some other travelers that were also hiking the trail. I didn't get any portraits the first day, but day 2 was great. Right at the start of our hike, a guy burst out of some bushes with a machete. His name was Osvaldo, and we learned he worked for the hostel we had stayed in the night before. I was really digging his style, and he was happy to pose for a photo. He loved seeing the photo on the back of the camera and kept asking me ways that he could get a copy. That's one of the things I really love about portrait photography. In a different country with a language barrier, you can still pick up on body language and emotion when taking an image and when sharing it. I sent this image to the hostel after we got back to the States. They shared it with Osvaldo, and they even used it on their Instagram account with a little bio, which was really cool to see. So still on day 2, but closer to the end of the hike for that day, we met this family that had built this big wooden overlook tower right on the edge of a cliff. It was 3 stories high, very solidly built, but still a little scary. We spent about an hour here photographing this family, trying to communicate as best we could. The father told me that him and his 2 oldest sons built this tower, and they had plans to make it even taller. This was a big family, and I got a lot of great portraits here. The oldest girl shared her Instagram with me, so I was able to send them the photos, and she said that she loved them and she shared them with the whole family. On to day 3. This was the last leg of our hike. This day was a challenge, a lot of big climbs, and we ended up at the rim of the crater at over 13,000 feet. But we still had a couple miles to get around the rim to the town that we were staying in for the night. After some rest, the next day I photographed 2 friends that we had met along the trail, Gustav and Julie. I also got a photo of this painter who had a little workshop in the hostel that we stayed in. That wraps up the portraits from this trip. We spent a couple more days relaxing near Cotopaxi and in Quito, the capital city, before we flew back home.
All right, so trip's over. I'm back at my home office. How do I go through all these images and pick which ones I want to share and use in a portfolio? So when I'm going through big batches of multiple images, I do it in multiple passes. The first pass, you shouldn't look at an image for more than maybe 3 seconds. And you're just quickly going through everything, and every photo that might be a maybe that you want to look closer at, give it like a 2-star rating or a color tag that you'll remember, and then take a little break, rest your eyes. After your break, come back and filter just the images with that tag and do another pass, this time spending a little more time with each photo. You're just going to repeat this filtering, reviewing, tagging process with plenty of breaks in between, sometimes a day or two, maybe more, until you have everything narrowed down to like a nice, concise group of images that tells the story of whatever this project is. After I get all the images narrowed down to the ones I want, typically anything that's not a portrait, I'll just process in Capture One, white balance, exposure, contrast, all that sort of stuff, and export that as a JPEG. But for my portrait work, I actually edit for a very flat, low contrast image coming out of Capture One or Lightroom. And I do most of my portrait retouching and post-processing in Photoshop. Capture One and Lightroom, I know they have layers, but it's not as easy as Photoshop, and I have a bunch of keyboard commands all built out.
Here we are in Photoshop. This is the flat image that I exported from Capture One. And now we're just gonna build curves layers and any other retouching layers that we need on top of this to get to our final image, like this. So I always start with just a blank layer for any sort of retouching. You can see here, there's just a little pieces of grass and stuff down here in his pants that were distracting. So we just got rid of those. And then with this color layer, we can turn all of these off, go one by one. So I like to build my images with pretty small curves adjustments. You can see, I'll show you up here. So you can see these curves adjustments are pretty minor, and then they just sort of start stacking on top of each other to make the image that I want. These dodge and burn layers are very subtle. If you look on his cheeks here, just to kind of darken the cheeks a little bit and push the attention more towards the face and eyes. This layer darkens the background, and then we have it masked so that it's not darkening Oswaldo. He stays the right exposure. I like using this channel mixer with a blue filter to bring down the saturation a bit, and this will, you can play with these different filter colors and they affect the image differently, but I like blue because it darkens and adds contrast to skin tones. Another curve layer to kind of make the shadows a little washed out, sort of a film type look. And then this layer is a smart filter that adds some noise, which just helps blend the texture of all the in-focus areas with the soft out-of-focus areas. Brings the whole image together a bit. And then I didn't like that his skin tone was looking a little orangey, and so I kind of brought down the saturation a little more with another channel mixer layer, and that one's at a low opacity. And then this whole group at full strength was a little too strong, so I just brought that down to 90%. And that's about it.
If you made it this far in the video, thanks so much for watching. I hope there's something useful for you. I'd love it if you comment below, tell me what your favorite image was, or ask me any other questions that I might not have answered, and I'll see you in the next video.